And their families.
Good evening. Could I have your attention? Thank you. Welcome to the Lower Providence Township Board of Supervisors business meeting for Thursday, October
Recording in
21st,
progress.
2021. Would you all please rise and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Township Manager Schuster, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Chairman McFarland.
Here.
Vice Chair Ekman.
Here.
Supervisor Koles.
Here.
Supervisor Knights. Supervisor Knights is not on at the moment. Supervisor Sorgini is absent. And I also believe we have Solicitor Peter Nelson online. Is that correct? Peter Nelson is online. Thank you.
Yes, I'm online.
And Peter, you can hear us adequately?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Would you advise us when Supervisor Knights joins? Sure. Thank you. There was no executive meeting held before this session. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda. There are two issues or items on this agenda that are not typical. One is a designation of agent resolution from 2021 to 2026 to authorize our township manager, interim township manager Greg Schuster, to act on our behalf. This is a routine matter, but one which we need to pass. So that will be part of the consent agenda. The other item on there that I've asked the township manager to mention is that we have an unusually large authorization of payment of bills, which amounts to $1,715,021.91. And Greg, if you would just give us some of the high point of why that number is larger than normal.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to point out that I believe Supervisor Knights has joined the meeting. The reason for the large payment is contributions to the pension fund. The township does maintain two pension funds. One is a non-uniform and one is a uniform fund. And approximately this time every single year is when we receive our payment of state aid. So it's very common that in the October timeframe you would make a very large payment into your pension funds. That totals approximately $1 million of that $1.7 million payment.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Having heard that, can I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Have a motion, can I get a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is commendations and presentations. Item 2A is police commendations, and Chief Jackson has that for us. Chief?
Okay, could I have the police officers come on up, please? Okay, good evening. Tonight we will be presenting commendations to 13 police officers and the Township's Emergency Management Coordinator for their response to an incident that took place on Carden Place back in June of this year. There were many first emergency responders that responded to this incident. That included police, fire, EMS. They all did an outstanding job under incredibly difficult circumstances. These officers here stood out from that crowd, and I'm honored to present them to you for recognition this evening. Please hold your applause. We have two different commendations, so please hold your applause until both commendations have been read or presented. The first commendation is being presented to Sergeant Matt Kunert, Corporal Rob Heim, Officer Reggie Neely, Officer Matt Barber from Lower Providence Township Police Department, and Officer John Barnshaw from Collegeville Borough Police, Officer Brian Bishop from West Norriton Township Police, and Officer Bill Murphy from Bridgeport Borough Police. These officers are being awarded a commendation for bravery. The citation reads, on June 10th, 2021, at 11:56 a.m., the Lower Providence Township Police Department received a 911 call from a witness advising that a Lower Providence Township Code Enforcement officer was being chased by a male with a gun at 4045 Carden Place. The incident began when a code enforcement officer arrived on location to perform an inspection at the home for known hoarding conditions. As code enforcement entered the residence, the homeowner, Thomas Razzie, displayed a firearm and acted aggressively toward the code enforcement officer. Fortunately, the code enforcement officer was able to exit the residence and get to safety. Within minutes, Sergeant Matthew L. Kunert and Officer Matthew M. Barber arrived on scene and confronted Thomas Razzie in front of his home. The officers ordered Razzie, who was not displaying a weapon at the time, to stop, but he retreated into his home and slammed the door behind him. Additional police officers, including Corporal Robert Heim and Officer Reginald Neely, arrived on scene and established a perimeter around Razzie's residence. That's a tongue twister. Yeah. Moments later, loud explosions and gunfire was heard from within Razzie's residence. The residence quickly became engulfed in flames, and the officers immediately developed a plan to safely evacuate the residents and the surrounding homes. Sergeant Kunert, Corporal Heim, Officer Neely, and Officer Barber, along with West Norriton Township Police Officer Brian Bishop, Collegeville Borough Police Officer John Barnshaw, and Bridgeport Borough Police Officer William Murphy, efficiently and safely evacuated the residents from nearby homes. The officers were able to accomplish this task under dangerous and difficult circumstances with no injuries to residents or emergency personnel. After safely evacuating the residents, the officers remained on scene and provided security for fire personnel who were called to suppress the building fire that unfortunately destroyed several homes. Your participation in this incident represents an outstanding accomplishment in the protection of life and property. This accomplishment was made because of teamwork with decisive and professional actions, strategies, tactics, and bravery. The second commendation is for the same incident, and this commendation is being awarded to Lieutenant Bill Hopkins, Sergeant Mike Higgins, Sergeant Ryan Singleton, Detective Mike Nastasi, Detective Charlie King, and Detective Scott Dreibelbiss, and Emergency Management Coordinator and Fire Marshal Mike Rolfing. Unfortunately, Mike couldn't be here this evening. He sends his regrets. I'll make sure he gets his commendation. These officers are being awarded a Distinguished Unit Commendation, and their citation reads, on June 10th, 2021 at 11:56 a.m., the Lower Providence Township Police Department received a 911 call from a witness advising that a Lower Providence Township Code Enforcement officer was being chased by a male with a gun at 4045 Carden Place. The incident began when a code enforcement officer arrived on location to perform an inspection at the home for known hoarding conditions. As code enforcement entered the residence, the homeowner, Thomas Razzie, displayed a firearm and acted aggressively towards the code enforcement officer. Fortunately, the code enforcement officer was able to exit the residence and get to safety. Within minutes, members of the Lower Providence Township Police Department arrived on location and established a perimeter. Moments later, loud explosions of gunfire was heard from Razzie's residence. The residence quickly became engulfed in flames, and the officers immediately identified a command post location, requested assistance from other agencies, and developed a plan to safely evacuate the residents and surrounding homes. Lieutenant William Hopkins, Sergeant Michael Higgins, Sergeant Ryan Singleton, Detective Scott Dreibelbiss, Detective Charles King, Detective Michael Nastasi, and Fire Marshal Michael Rolfing quickly responded and worked together to expand the perimeter, establish the command post, funnel resources to the officers on scene, and assist with safely evacuating and reuniting displaced residents. The actions of these individuals and the many emergency responders that responded to this incident ensured that all residents were safely evacuated without injury and reunited with their families. Your participation in this incident represents an outstanding accomplishment in protection of life and property. This accomplishment was made because of teamwork with decisive and professional action, strategy, tactics, and bravery. So, you heard about the incident, you saw it on the news. It was a pretty dynamic, pretty chaotic incident. And these officers here are directly responsible for saving, in my mind, without a doubt, many lives and prevented serious injury to a lot of residents on that day. So with that being said, congratulations to all of you. I want to thank you for your efforts on that day, and you should all be very proud of you. I'm very proud of each and every one of you, so thank you. Before I hand out the commendations, Sergeant Matt Coonert would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Chief. I don't obviously have anything written down. I don't have a good citation to read from. And Chief Jackson alluded to the fact that there were hundreds of assets, personnel there that day that assisted in accomplishing this enormous task. But what he didn't mention is his role in this incident. It's not enough for a chief of police to get promoted and shortly thereafter try to manage a police department through a pandemic, as he continues to do. But this chief of police that day experienced a situation that many executive chiefs of police in this county will never experience, let alone the state. And it was his leadership that brought this to a successful outcome. So I think we all owe it to Chief Mike Jackson as a thank you for your leadership in guiding us from the community, the Board of Supervisors, the police department. We thank you for what you did that day, too.
Thank you. I wasn't quite prepared for that, so, but I do appreciate it. And it just goes to show the caliber of police officer you have here in Lower Providence Township. They think of others before themselves, and that's a perfect example of it. None of these guys wanted any recognition. None of them expected it, but they certainly do deserve it. And I can't thank our partners, the different partners from different agencies that came out and responded. Some of the other ones are still here, are here today. And without their assistance, this could have went very, very poorly, and it didn't. It worked out pretty well, considering. So with that being said, I'd like to present the commendations. All right, and that concludes our accommodations for tonight. Thank you all for coming out, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you to all of you, all of these officers who, not surprisingly, did such an outstanding job of supporting what erupted from nothing into a highly chaotic situation in very little time. They were very professional. At risk to their own safety, they were able to assure the safety of other responders and the public, and fortunately, none of those people suffered in any injury. So, again, thank you very much, Chief, and all the officers who have done that. Thank you. We'll give you a moment to leave, and then we'll move on.
Light goes on.
Okay, thank you once again, Chief. Very proud of you and your police force, and grateful to the surrounding officers who also lent a hand. That was a very chaotic and difficult situation that was handled very professionally with only the one injury to the suspect. So thank you again for that. Next on the agenda is item 2B, Community Development Department Commendation, and Mike Mazinski has that information. Mike?
Thank you for this opportunity to recognize an individual who was very directly involved in the events that were just described and accomplished. This commendation is in recognition and appreciation of the extraordinary actions of our code enforcement officer, Jordan McCory, who was the initial township personnel and the person who was directly threatened in the attack. And as many people have stated, it was a very chaotic scene. It was the middle of the day with many people outside. It's in a very densely populated community. And yet Jordan, even under the duress of personal attack, was able to alert others to get to safety and to alert the emergency services to respond to the scene as quickly as he did. Without his efforts, along with those of others, this would have been a very much more tragic scenario. We lost 4 dwellings in that incident, the single loss of life, and we are immensely grateful for the efforts of everybody, and in my mind, especially for Jordan, for having the peace of mind to look out for others as well as his own safety. And in that appreciation, I'd like to offer Jordan this token of our appreciation in recognition and appreciation of your extraordinary actions to prevent harm to residents and property under the threat of personal danger during the events of June 10th, 2021. And this is from the Lower Providence Township Community Development Department. Thank you.
Jordan, would you just step up here? We'd like to shake your hand, and thank you. Thank you. Appreciate what you did. Again, a pleasure to recognize the commitment and bravery of our employees who continue to do on a daily basis an extraordinary job. And thank you, Jordan, for your courage in that situation. Item 3 on the, item 2C on the agenda is a stormwater presentation by Supervisor Knights. Gary had asked for some time to offer some thoughts on stormwater. And while we haven't at the board level seen Gary's presentation, we look forward to hearing his thoughts on this, and we'll ask questions as we need to. Gary, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairperson McFarland. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
You'll have to, you have the ability to share, Gary, so you can.
Am I sharing now?
If you're going to present, yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Gary, make sure your volume's up a little higher,
Is this any better?
a little bit.
Okay, I will speak up. Bill or the AV people, is it possible for you to increase my volume a little bit? Yeah, and as Chairperson McFarland mentioned, the board hasn't seen it. How am I coming across?
You're good.
Thank you. The board hasn't seen this. It's just like a work presentation where the first time you present it is when you present it. So I'm very open to comments and feedback. I'll incorporate that into the presentation and I'll distribute it afterwards. And I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. I am going to go on mute and see if that, or turn my volume down. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I cannot hear, so raise your hand if you want to interrupt me. So this gives a summary of what I see as the broad problem. In 2019, we had a pretty significant flash flood, 16 feet on the Perkiomen. A woman and young son died in Berks County. We set a new record in 2020 with Hurricane Isis of 19 feet. In 2021 with Hurricane Ida, we set another record of about 25 feet. What's really significant is when you think about a valley, you know, it's in a V shape. And I'm a mechanical engineer, so I formally studied fluid flow. And so, you know, the form factor of a valley is like this. So if you go from 1 feet to 6 feet, that 5 feet of increase is a lot. But because of the shape of the valley, when you go from like 19 feet to 25 feet, that is a much huger amount of water. So it's really significant going from 19 to 25 feet. It's a trend. And the trend continued in Italy. This is a global issue. October 4th, they had 24 to 29 inches of rain in 12 hours. Now compare that to our 8 inches in 24 hours. You know, it's 3 times, yeah, maybe 6 times as much. I'll have to ask Tim to do the math. But there's, it was a whole heck of a lot more water. And unfortunately, it's going to continue. So the key recommendation here is I think we just have to prepare for more rain. These are not anomalies in my view. So the next slide. So some ideas. I have just 3 or 4 slides. They're pretty high level. So I think the one thing, we just have to recognize that heat and rainfall, not heat, I'll fix that, will continue to increase. And it's possible that our current standards do not reflect the flooding that we're expecting. I pulled some data showing you know, how temperature and precipitation has increased from the 1950s to 2017. The scientific consensus is that it's actually increasing faster than what the earlier predictions were. So we just have to be prepared. Some super high level actions that I see for flood prone areas. And this is for me driving around. Chief Jackson will attest, I'm probably driving places where I shouldn't, but I like to check out the water when it rains. And so, you know, I think we want to pre-position road closure signs, put them in places where they won't get washed away. A lot of just corporate basics. I think we want to start checklisting and proceduralizing. What do we do when we have a local disaster like this? If we haven't already done it, you know, we should have our evacuation plans. You know, if we're going to get 12 inches of rain in 4 hours, you know, who evacuates, what direction do they go? We should just have that, someone should think that through and write it down so that when the weather forecast comes in and it's like there's a holy shucks moment, you know, about to happen, you know, we want to be prepared to tell people what to do. We might be able to use Ready Monco a little bit better and maybe a little more strategic. We should consider some hydrology, zoning, planning, thinking about that from a planning perspective. Key recommendation and no-brainer is no more building in floodplains is my recommendation. And I'd even consider, you know, we're trying to get FEMA funding. We should consider, I'd call it like a floodplain to trails program. You don't want to be building houses anymore or even living in these places that are going to flood because it's probably just going to get worse. So figure out a way to turn them into parks would be my strategic recommendation. Easier said than done. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done to make that work, but I'm setting a vision here. As leaders, we need to set the vision and then figure out how to make it happen. I think from a financial standpoint, there's going to be money involved. We're lucky. We live in the United States. We live in Pennsylvania, which is a rich state in the country. And we live in Montgomery County, which is probably one of the richer counties in the state. So we're actually very lucky that we have the resources. But we all know that, there's not an infinite amount of money available. So I think we want to think about this from a pretty strategic standpoint. We need to do some strategic planning and think about it from a total cost of ownership perspective in terms of, what we want to do. As our roads wash out more, we're going to need to think about, do we harden that infrastructure when we have to rebuild it? Or maybe in certain areas, it's like we have to suck it up and it's going to be a rebuild and washout type of cycle. Preventative maintenance, when I was in the military, preventative maintenance was actually one of the cheapest ways to keep assets operating. It's better to paint something than it is to have it rust out and then you have to replace the part. Preventative maintenance, you get a lot of bang for the buck. Clear drains and swales, address small washouts before they get big. I saw a washout area, for example, over by Audubon Road and Rittenhouse, where I'm looking at it and saying, we ought to put some stones in there. So I think we want to be thinking about these things so that we hopefully can harden through maintenance some of our infrastructure, but then we should be thinking hard from a long-term budgeting standpoint, 5, 10, 15 years. How are we going to harden things? Because I believe we're going to have more storms like this. As we put those strategic plans in place, have the planning commission, maybe they have to shift a little bit in terms of how they look at new projects. Not just, is it okay to get that in, but more like, how does this really fit? Do we really want to have this type of project in this location? And, drive to make sure that the projects that we're approving, fit into the overall plan and get the hardened infrastructure built as we go. Environmental Advisory Council, I'm very happy that we have it. I think we want to continue to appoint motivated experts. I think we can also leverage universities. We have some great ones around here, Temple, Penn. We have Audubon Society right here in Audubon, Pennsylvania, in Lower Providence. Leverage their expertise. Riverbend Education Center, very smart environmental people. On the legal front, 50 Earth Justice. Get some smart lawyers in there that are, really, want to basically solve these problems and can help us through the types of things that we need to do to solve it. So it's really about strategic planning, bringing in the best brains we can to solve this problem. Some other recommendations. I've spoken with a number of residents where they live in older developments. They lack stormwater controls. Residents know a lot of the issues. They have ideas for swales, detention basins, things like that, but they don't know how to approach it because there's no common area. One person's property backs up to another person's property, but together they might look at it and say, maybe we should put a swale in, but how do we do a joint property project like that? So new territory, I think, as a township, as leaders, I want to have a gung-ho attitude about this, like basically how do we pull together and solve these things? Not, well, we can't do that. There might be a, issue here or there, but more act like, let's figure out how we can solve these issues. And it might be bringing in, helping a group of neighbors figure out, well, if you want to do this, here's the zoning, here's what you need to do from a land development standpoint legally to parcelize out the land or whatever the technical term is for it. If you want to have a swale that goes across a couple of properties, maybe provide some level of engineering support to it, in a very wise way so that we can do things to improve our ability to handle large amounts of stormwater that are going to continue to come through. Talked a little bit earlier about standardizing some of the emergency response policies, procedures. A lot of corporations have a war room during declared emergencies. It can be a clearinghouse for information and resources. It's a defined location. People know where it is. You want to have, you have staff there 24/7 during the emergency. You might have TVs, telephones. It's a place where people can call in. Hey, I'm running out of water. What do I do? Oh, go here. I think we also want a pre-planned liaison with outside agencies and volunteer groups, state, county, federal. And I would also recommend having a board liaison so that we have elected process oversight. So, if you look at any corporation, they'll tend for important things to assign an executive sponsor who provides a level of escalation to the process, provides that more strategic look at things as they're going on. And so I think this is an important one. As we think about Peter, the board of the future is, as we're going to have more emergencies potentially, maybe have a board liaison who's going to focus on that sort of thing, when the chips are down. So 2 last slides. These are just as I was preparing for this, I looked at some of the federal information that's out there. Just today, the National Intelligence Estimate came out on some of the challenges to national security. And so a lot of folks are looking at this. Federal agencies, what I did was I didn't go through all of them, but I pulled out some of the things that federal agencies have said to plan for around agriculture, commerce, defense. And, this is not directly applicable to us, but I just quickly swizzled it into, and this is my last slide before I open up for questions, swizzled it into what are some of the things we want to think about locally. So, it's possible that there's going to be, more food shortages for a large variety of reasons. So I think, more food production, more food storage in the township is probably in the benefit of our residents. Secure water supplies, make sure that we have water tanks that are big. If we had a big water emergency, a lot of rain, and the water, powers out for a long time, we want to have gravity-fed water. We want to be thinking about just some of the basics as we think ahead 5, 10, 15 years. Another one on the commerce side, from a career business standpoint, okay, hey, we all have to make a living even if we get into a rough situation. So, thinking through what's the adaptation learning curve, what's the adaptation curve for a business, as things change. So start doing things now to be prepared for, it's kind of like a Gartner hype cycle or, a Gartner, curve as you're moving through the stages of a corporate change. So what's that going to look like? It's definitely more electric cars and electric infrastructure. That's a no-brainer. The companies are all doing it. So that's something that's pretty clear that we want to do, but there could be other things from a business standpoint. Consistent power and internet access, for example. As we have more people working from home during floods, we want to make sure that, if we are doing work, that we harden our power supply, make sure we have good internet access. Leverage FEMA, we talked about that earlier. Homeland security, that's national level, but even Lower Providence now has climate refugees. We're going to be voting at our next meeting on somebody who needs to move into an office because their home's flooded out. I talked with one person who was in their attic as their home was starting to float off of its foundation. So we have a number of people that don't have homes anymore, and that's going to have knock-on effects as people from around the world, start to migrate more and more. And then finally, transportation. One thing, this isn't exactly due to water, but as we have higher temperatures, starting to find that asphalt melts and the roads start to have problems. So we probably want to start thinking about, and this is where some of the engineering standards might not have yet caught up with what we're going to be dealing with in the future, maybe start to think about materials that can deal with higher temperatures. On a super hot day, even today, the asphalt might get soft. What's going to happen as we have more and more and more hot days and the nights are not as cool? So I want to just start thinking about that with respect to infrastructure. So that's my last slide on that last bullet. I am going to turn up my volume so I can hear people and stop talking and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Very interesting presentation and a lot of good ideas there. Any questions, comments from the board?
So some of the things that Gary put in his presentation are things that have been brought up off and on with the board. But it did remind me that we had talked about immediately after the storm about having a debrief and lessons learned from Ida. And this definitely fits nicely into something like that. So I think maybe in November, potentially, maybe after the budget meetings, it would be nice to kind of get together with Public Works and the police and just see what did we learn, what can we, and emergency management, and see what we can kind of operationalize in case this happens again, or when this happens again, for that matter. And I definitely am a big fan of strategic planning for the future and long-range planning for the future. We have stormwater issues. I get calls and emails all the time from people that are dealing with water in their homes that never were in their homes before, in their basements. And so I do think we can have a role to help them solve those problems for themselves.
This might just be a good segue. Greg, would it be appropriate for you to kind of just give just a one-line summary of what you're doing with the FEMA grant and that submission of the letter of intent?
Quite frankly, you just did it in one line. The first step, and this, and for everyone's knowledge, we are talking about one specific grant that would allow for buyouts of homes that are in flood-prone areas. I believe it is 75% funded by the federal government, 25% by the state government. The first step in that process is to send in a letter of intent. I did do that on behalf of the township. We are awaiting receipt of the application package so we can further flesh out all the details. Once that happens, there's going to be a public education outreach so that people who want to participate in this process can get in touch with us. We already have a list of potential properties that we will, of course, reach out to, and I've already been taking some calls from people, but that is in process. So everyone just keep your eyes open, and when you see this information come out, please go ahead and get in touch with us. Sorry, that was more than one line.
And Greg, I just got my hands on some points of contact. So Upper Providence did 2 presentations to their community on the grants and whatnot. So they're a little bit further ahead than we are. So I got who from FEMA and PEMA presented at those, and I'll share those with you after the meeting.
I do have a copy of that presentation, and we're also reaching out to the grant writer that they're using, not necessarily saying that we are going to engage that person, but just to open up a dialogue. But any information you have, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that one's interesting because I think she works on behalf of the homeowner. There is someone that they've engaged that actually helps homeowners and takes a percentage. She gets a percentage.
They don't do it for free.
Yeah, it's not for free. But it is an interesting concept that's out there. So I'm definitely curious about that because that might help some homeowners who are having trouble navigating the process.
Definitely something we want to look at because this is not a grant that you apply for very frequently.
Just to segue from that for a moment, we have received from the federal government under the American Rescue Plan a significant $1.4 million that is yet by the federal government to be clearly defined as to what it can be used for. And so we have not allocated any of that money. However, it is our understanding that stormwater will become part of that money eligibility. Have we heard anything recently on when those rules will be clarified?
We're still waiting for some more information. Sue Law did attend a presentation today. She's waiting to get the slides. She did get some more information. The standard for what you're talking about is clean water. So they will allow expenditures that have anything to do with clean water, and stormwater is considered part of that process. So as of right now, it looks very favorable for anything that you would want to do for stormwater. But again, we don't have the nitty-gritty details yet, nor do I even know if there's a process in which we can ask questions and make sure the expenditures are allowable. So we're still waiting to get more information, but I would say that stormwater expenditures look very promising at this point.
I guess that
Hey, Greg,
would kind of leads to something that then I think it's even more important while we're waiting on final confirmation to have a plan, because I think kind of attacking it willy-nilly is not going to get us the impact that we need. Whereas if we can look at where we were impacted, and I know that Mike has a lot of this already mapped out, it would be really helpful to start that process even before the money comes. And to get that done. And I've gone to the EAC. I know they've kind of gone back and forth, but I've not seen a product that gets us to that point yet. So I think that it's something that would be helpful to kind of get a larger group to look at.
So along those lines, the EAC is preparing basically a simple executive summary on the work that they've been looking into. They've been working with Public Works, looking at reoccurring flooding areas, and also with our township engineer, so that we have, the first step of good mapping, that's the first issue, and then how to approach it. So I do believe they're preparing that executive summary. If they're not doing it tonight, it might be the next meeting, they might be doing that.
I have asked that they, I was going to come to that, I've asked that they join our meeting on the 4th of November to give us that update on where they are. And when we look at the presentation Gary just made, and as Gary and I discussed prior to this presentation, as we see perhaps some overlap and some additions to what they're considering, we have a factual basis from which we might be able to then start to have some type of a formation of a action committee, for lack of a better word, that if we look at what happened in Ida, I'm very proud of our emergency services, police and fire people who acted, I think, very effectively in a reactive way. And what we are talking about now, and what is important going forward, is to begin to do some proactive steps, some of which Gary has mentioned in his presentation. So I think once we hear again from the EAC, which this board then had directed to give us that presentation, from their feedback along with what Gary has given us, we could be able to move forward then. With regard to the American Rescue Plan, while I certainly would hope and expect that we can use some stormwater money, we don't know what other topics would be covered, so it'd be difficult to slice that pie up without knowing how big it is or how many slices we need. But certainly we should be preliminarily expecting to apply some of those funds. The important thing I think to get to first is some of the issues with regard to our stormwater infrastructure and some of the costs that might be associated with that, which I understand the EAC has some ballpark information on that. So all of that's going to be very helpful, and I'm pleased and encourage the board to continue to address this and perhaps develop some proactive measures to improve on and help the necessary reactive measures that we take when these types of storms develop. So thank you, Gary, for that. We appreciate your initiative, and we look to carry that forward. We will have another discussion on stormwater with a presentation from the EAC on the 4th of November.
Okay, thank you for that. Hey, I have a question for Greg. You know, in the last sewer authority meeting, they were looking at some of the damage that occurred to the sanitary sewer infrastructure, and it's almost like some of the repair costs are close to consuming our CapEx, you know, for the year. You know, which is not where you want to be necessarily. But I guess the question to research possibly is whether it's possible to use any of the rescue funds for sanitary sewer. Would that be considered, if the problems are caused by the stormwater, is hardening the sanitary sewer something that those funds could be used for? We don't need an answer right now, but you know, we have a number of infrastructures that you know, are at risk. So we want to make sure that we have strong infrastructure.
I will do some research on that, but I believe the answer is actually yes. I believe expenditures on sewer systems is one of the allowable expenses for the American Rescue Plan, but I will research that and get you a final answer.
Okay, thank you.
Greg, I agree with that.
I have a follow-up question for you, Gary. I mean, I would assume the sewer authority is pursuing reimbursement from FEMA for the disaster assistance, as we are as
Yes.
well.
Colleen, yes, and I totally recognize that they're a different entity and they should be pursuing it on their own. I'm just thinking about all the things that we're responsible for and whether we would actually provide that money to them or not, even if it was allowed. You know, we have to look at that, as Kara pointed out, in the context of an overall, plan, and we should be allocating the money to things that are, on the highest priority and give the best bang for the buck. So I agree with you, Colleen.
Okay, good to know that, they're going to hopefully pursue to get reimbursed if there's anything that was damaged. I mean, they have pipes that were broken off and, lots of things. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to item 3 on the agenda, new business. And the only item under there is item 3A, a decision on the trash collection option. And Township Manager Schuster has information on that. Craig?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No new information. Everything has been already provided. This is an opportunity to hopefully make a final decision on which direction you would like us to go, whether to go with a single hauler or a multiple haulers or open subscription model. We're currently in a single hauler system, and it's important to know which direction we're going as we are currently developing the bid for that. If the board wishes to change direction and go into a open subscription plan, that would be something we wouldn't have to do a bid process for. But if they did want to continue on the single hauler, we would continue to work on the bid and bring it to the board as soon as possible for releasing.
Okay, thank you. Just as a brief reminder, and you can correct me, but the current trash contract expires at the end of February. And so, or is it some other?
You are correct.
And so if we're going to bid and determine who our next trash haulers are going to be post that date, the requirement for going out for bids and receiving bids and reviewing bids and assigning bids should be completed no later than early January in order to give the successful bidder or the successful contractors time to put their systems in place before the current contract expires. Is that reasonable to say?
That is reasonable. Of course, if the bid were to remain with a single hauler and the current vendor would win that bid, there's very little transition needed. However, if there is a new vendor that takes over, there has to be education, there has to be new receptacles put out there. So there is a process that does take some time, yes.
And while that may be true, we can't be presumptive with regard to the outcome. We need to plan accordingly. So that's one of the key reasons why we had 2 prior meetings to this one to discuss the various options under multi and single hauler, including the last meeting we had, leading up to a vote tonight on which way we would go with that decision. And so with that, I will ask for a motion on trash collection.
And we're voting on just which decision to make, single hauler or subscription at this point.
Yes, that's correct. We would define in great detail, after we make that decision, the types of criteria we'd put into that request for bid. Okay, well, I will make a motion to approve a single hauler trash collector bid process for the township. Do I have a second?
I'll second that, and I'm seconding it so that we can have some discussion on it.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion and a second. So questions and comments from the board?
I have
One
several.
thing,
Gary, you going to go first while we have your volume up?
sure. What I was going to suggest is I think it's very important that citizens have a level of choice. I think I've gotten some feedback that being forced to have 2 collections a day might be too much for some people. I certainly understand the rationale for having one provider. We call it one throat to choke. If there's, if you're having problems versus if everyone goes it on their own, we have less control actually to deliver good service. But if we go with one provider and it's one size fits all, that's causing some angst. So one of my thoughts there is that we ask for some choices in a single haul bid. Perhaps one choice is you have once a week trash collection. And another alternative is a person could go for twice a week. That might result in one set of prices, or if it's one size fits all, it might actually be a different price level, because of certainty that the hauler has. So I would request that if we go with a single hauler bid, that we request almost like a menu of choices for our homeowners to pick from at different price points.
Okay, Gary, before I turn it over to Kara, those are certainly valid points, and we aren't attempting to define the specifications of the bid tonight, but after we've made the choice, points like you've made will certainly be considered.
I actually think now is the time to make points.
I was going to say, I kind of disagree with that because, you need to sort of know which way you're going before if you're going to pick a path, you want to know where the path leads to. You don't just pick a path and say, okay, what's the next branch? Like normally you want to know where you're going to. So I do think it's valid to have some of that discussion now, Peter.
So I am also, having talked and listened and done research, leaning towards a single hauler. The thing that provides me the most angst is that I'm having to pick before kind of seeing it laid out. Because to me, choice gives you competition, choice drives down cost, choice provides an opportunity for residents to be able to get rid of somebody who is not performing. The thing that gives me the most pause on that is that it then transfers the burden to the homeowners too. So if we switch from a single hauler to a subscription service, just so residents are clear, what I'm being told is everybody will have to create their own plan. The township will basically be absolved of that responsibility. So everybody will have to call and find a provider and set up their service. So there will probably be some disruption during the first 2 to 3 months of that transition if we were to go to a subscription service. You can pick what you want, right? If you're a small household, you don't have a lot of trash, you can pick one and get the cheapest rate. If they don't perform, you can go to someone else. The other thing that gives me pause is the number of trash trucks. I have asked for creative solutions of 2 providers so that at least there is an option. I've been told it's never been done, or it's not something, or no one's going to bid on it. Nobody's going to come and do it. I tend to think just because we've done something the way that we've always done it, it's not the reason to keep doing it the way that we have. And if I had my preference, that would be my route is at least have 2 haulers with choice so that people have an option to go to if they're not getting the service that they need. Absent that, I would go with a single hauler who gives residents choice. And the other thing that's tremendously important is our staff, at tremendous cost of the taxpayers, spends a lot of time handling customer service issues for haulers. And that to me is untenable, and I would like to have some sort of better process to get reimbursed for that time coming back from residents, or the fact that our people are being shifted away from township work to deal with work that a provider that we're paying, that is being paid good money and has a monopoly on the township can handle that service. Because it costs them double. They're still paying their rates. They're having to take time out of their day to make the phone call. And then it's taking time away from our employees who are doing work for you as residents. I just want to make that clear. So I'd like to have enforceable penalties. I would love, and I've been told I can't do this, I would love to have providers who are not donors to political parties. I think that just like I asked in our ethics rule that our consultants not donate to political parties, I would also like to see that our haulers not donate to local political parties. They can go up the chain if they want, but at the local level. And I realize that I can't do that, but I want to make that statement. I'd also love to prioritize innovation with hauling and pickup, innovation in the area of sustainability, and green incentives for people to have less waste. I don't need heavy pickup. Why am I paying for heavy pickup? Sometimes my trash can is empty. So being able to have some leverage and maybe incentivize people who aren't providing as much. So I just wanted to be able to put that on the record because I'm going to have to pick, apparently, one way or the other. And I wanted the public to understand my thought process and what I really want. I may not get it, but I'm going to work as hard as I can to ensure that at a minimum, the residents have choice and they have someone to go to if they're not getting the service that they deserve.
Thank you, Kara. Just let me ask a clarification. Solicitor Nelson, you're with us?
Yes.
We had a meeting, in the last discussion, there was some discussion about the limitation of multi-haulers, and it's my understanding, and I'm looking for clarification, that we are not going to be permitted to limit haulers, and that also that we aren't going to be permitted to require licensing of haulers due to state regulations. How accurate is that, or what is the correct position on that?
Well, under state law, there cannot be, neither the township nor the county can set up licensing for trash haulers. All the licensing occurs on a statewide basis. Now, we can, in enacting our trash ordinance, we can require proof that the haulers have the necessary licenses from the state. We just cannot require them to get a license from us. And so, and we can't, we can't pass an ordinance that says, only haulers that have licenses from the township are allowed to pick up trash in the township. That's not permitted anymore.
But Peter, you could require haulers to meet certain criteria, even if they're licensed, is that correct? Like you could say must have, I don't know, I can't think of something right now, but I mean, you could limit based on size or, so it's not some fly-by-night kind of smaller firm. They have to be able to have a truck or whatever, guaranteed service or certain ranking or rating or things like that.
Without a specific example, I really can't comment one way or the other, because if we're trying to limit them on something that's covered by state regulations or the state licensing practices, we're not going to be able to set up a different requirement. If they meet the state requirements, we're going to have to accept that. If we want to set up a requirement that's not covered at all by the state law or state regulations or the state licensing practices, then arguably, yes, that's something we could do.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Peter, trying to understand what this means for us. Does that mean, is it sort of a A-B kind of choice that we either go the single hauler route or we open it up to anyone can go for anything?
Generally, there's a third option. I don't think you want it all, that I have one client that does. Actually, we have two clients that do this, which is it's in-house. But yeah, what I see in the vast majority of municipalities, yes, it's either there is no trash single hauler requirement, and that everyone within that municipality must go out and find their own trash hauler, or it is, bid out as a single hauler requirement, where either, the municipality's responsible for billing everything out, or they make the hauler bill everything out. I do believe there are municipalities where the hauler handles everything. If one of the concerns of the board is that the township staff is too involved in this, certainly the bid specs could be written in such a way that, the hauler's responsible for handling all complaints and everything like that. Not that the township isn't going to get complaints. It's just that, we're not responsible. We're not accepting responsibility to handle those sorts of things.
Do we currently accept responsibility? Like, I know a lot of people will go directly to our current trash provider if they have a problem, and they'll only escalate out to the township, and then the township, looks at the data, and, I know on a number of occasions has then, reached out if we see some trends going in the wrong direction. Like, what's our legally or whatever, what situation are we in today, Peter?
That I do not know, because I'm not familiar with the current contract.
Okay. Offhand, does anyone on the board or Greg know what the technical responsibility is? Is it with the township or is it with the homeowners today?
So it's a mixture of both. People can reach out to either the current provider or to the township, and they do both. Quite frankly,
Okay.
in a practical sense, I would almost prefer that the township not be cut out of the process. It wouldn't happen anyways, but for us to have an idea of what is going on, I think is very valuable.
And I think I heard earlier that the township is pretty heavily involved today in helping work through things. Would you agree with that, Greg?
Yeah, yes, I would. Any complaint we get, we pass along to Mascaro and try to get it resolved.
Chairperson McFarland, process question. Will residents have an opportunity to ask any questions or make comments before we vote on this?
They will. We'll complete the board's comments and questions, after which I will ask for questions and comments from the residents.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll just add short summary to my comments that I shared, I guess it was last meeting. I believe the township's overall role is to save our residents money. I've been through this trash contract a couple times now. The last time I was actually a no vote because we had the option in the bid specs, once a week pickup and twice a week pickup. Certainly the twice a week pickup was a very good bargain. It was a very good deal. But I was in favor of more to save more money for our, residents that are tight on budget. And so I was in favor of the once a week pickup, which was, I think it was like, at that point, 5 years ago, it was like $350 a year maybe or so, something like that. But nevertheless, I think at this point, it is our responsibility to make sure trash is collected come February 2022. I think after all these years of having a one hauler system, our residents would take quite a while to adjust to a new system. I would be concerned with trash being picked up, certainly during this, as the pandemic still continues. If you are picking other haulers at that point in February, you might find that you're not going to get the service that you had hoped or you would be paying for. As we've seen in the past 18 months, it's a tough job for this industry. But I am very concerned, as is Kara, with better protections for the township and the township residents if we do engage in a contract. We do have some provisions in the current one, but have some legal parameters that would make it difficult and very expensive for us to try to pursue those, repercussions. So I would want to see that in any current or bid that we put out. And I'd like us to again put in options to see once a week, what once a week is and what a twice a week is. I know we've done this before, but it's very difficult to offer some residents once a week and other residents twice a week, because someone that's bidding a township-wide contract, they're going to take the number of households that we have and the cost that for them to collect the trash and come up with the bid. So when you start to shuffle numbers around and put different groups of people that are sort of an unknown to the bidder, we might not get anybody to bid on it if it's too complicated, too cumbersome for somebody to put a big quote out. So with that, I am hopeful that we'll get some good numbers and competitive numbers once we do put this out for bid, if it does pass this evening at this point.
Okay, thank you. So I heard from each of you, and just to restate or clarify my earlier comment, I'm happy to discuss these variables as we have been, and just was saying that we are not trying to finalize what the bid itself process would look like tonight. We will do that as part of the process going forward. So, Sarah, having said the customer service cost is a concern, like to see a variable package option, like enforceable penalties, and some innovation regarding sustainability. Colleen added that maybe we want to consider a once a week or twice per week. These are all discussable as parts of conditions we would put in the bid. That piece we're not going to decide tonight, but we do agree that we would have those kinds of detailed discussions, and that would be something we would want to follow up fairly quickly. So including Jason, who is not here and may have other ideas, along with some of the points Gary has made. So I certainly did not intend to dismiss any of those concerns, and nor did I intend to approve or disapprove of any of those concerns, just to identify that those portions or those points in the bid process would have to be considered before the final bid was put together. So I hope I've made myself clear to the board on that. Any other comments or questions from the board? Greg?
Yeah, and just to add to what you were saying, I would appreciate it if any board... I'd appreciate it if any board member would go ahead and send me any additional... Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. Now, I did hear the comments that were made this evening. If you have any other comments that pop in your head, please feel free to email them to me or give me a call. We are in the process of putting this bid together. It is an incredibly lengthy and technical document. There will be multiple options on there, some of which you've already discussed. And I imagine that when this does come before the board, there will be a lengthy discussion. Our goal would be to go ahead and have everything prepared so that you can make a decision that evening and say, yes, we're going to take that. No, we're not going to do that. But in order to prepare for that, any of these additional ideas would be beneficial ahead of time so we can make sure we can have a productive discussion.
I have two I forgot. And this may come into, but just transparency is important to me. Having a rubric and an understanding for me as well as the public on how selection works, who's on the selection committee, when they're receiving bids and down selecting, I think, because I know sometimes staff and other people handle things first. So that's just, as we go through this process, I'd like it to be very public and people aware of when things are going out in the RFP and whatnot.
I think I can address that right now. This is not like an RFQ. This is an RFP where you're going to get actual bids and actual numbers. So inside that bid is going to be options and costs from the prospective bidders. This board will choose which option they want. And in that option, there will be a lowest qualified bidder. And that's who's going to win the contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking more like a rubric, right? Like a checklist of these things to be able to say these people have it, these people don't. I'm assuming it's part of the process, but I've not seen a lot of our contracts and how selections
So,
are done.
yeah, in this case, it's not going to work like this. It's not like you're selecting a professional consultant. It's going to be, number one, did the bidder meet the qualifications? It's a yes/no answer, because there's going to be certain qualifications in there to actually participate in the process. If the answer is no, you're excluded. If the answer is yes, then we go to see who has the lowest bid of all the qualified bidders in the option that you choose.
Greg, that raises a question for me, because,
Oh, sorry, Tim, you're
lowest
preparing the
bid
bid.
sometimes can,
I am prepared, I have prepared the boilerplate advertisement and document that is advertised. As far as content, I'm hoping that the board can provide us with the content that is to be included in the bid. And John Rice and Greg and I have that document utilizing the last bid as the basis. And again, Greg, just so we can refresh everyone's memory, the last bid had a number of options. It had I think a 2-year contract, a 3-year contract, a 5-year contract with a couple of extension options. It had once-a-week pickup, it had twice-a-week pickup, it had a bag program, it had lawn waste, it had major, white goods, heavy goods, and again, a matrix, as you say, Kara, of the options that the board wanted to provide to the residents. And each of those options had a cost associated with it. And so I'm assuming we're doing a very similar thing this time, where we'll have a couple different contract durations that we can choose from. We'll have a couple of different options with regard to, whether it's once-a-week pickup, twice-a-week pickup. Can I choose not to participate in the total program, but instead choose to purchase a per bag, waste, for older senior citizens, folks maybe who are not here all year, they might choose to participate in that type of program. Lawn waste, leaves, debris, sticks, that was a big one. And again, the heavy major white goods, sofas and refrigerators and those types of things. So, electronics too. I think we had electronics in that one, TVs and computers and whatever else, electronic disposal stuff was in there as well. So, once we understand what the board wants to see, we can then refine that bid and then advertise it and see what comes back.
hey,
I think it
Tim,
would help the board.
can you hear me?
If Greg sent a copy of the trash contract and the current one to help give guidance as to what the future one might look like.
I guess the reason, I did get a copy of it, and it's like any legal document I look at my company, and I'm always like, lawyers, because they're not easy to read, right? And so that's what I'm looking for, because I read these things, and I'm not a lawyer. And so I worry that I'm going to miss something in these lengthy documents that have thou shalt and must and whatnot. So I guess I should say, what I'm looking for is simplicity. I want to know what I'm getting before it goes out. So I think that, and so that would be my ask, is as we put this together, for those of us who aren't lawyers and who don't look, is some simplistic guide that says, this is what we're asking for. And then when it comes back, then I can go, okay, I asked for this in a table, and I can look at it and maybe give some ideas. This is what I asked for, and this is what I got. And that's really that simplicity that I'm looking for, because I'm not an attorney. I hate reading documents from attorneys, and I'm constantly pushing my company to put it in English that people can understand. So I realize there's a reason for it, but for me, it needs to be plain so people can understand. And so, and I'd like to be able to understand it without having to call you 10 times and Greg and John. So that's all I'm asking for, is that simplicity and maybe being creative in how we lay it out.
And I think when you see you already have the previous document, but when you look in the middle and you kind of take out all the legalese, you'll see the bid response forms. And there's a bid response form for each option. And that's probably the simplest way to lay it out, just by looking at those. The other thing I'll say is, I understand that these are, complex documents that you only look at like once every 5 or 7 years. For any board member that wants to make an appointment or have a call, please let me know, whether it be with just me or with Tim and John, Peter, whoever it is on the team, we can sit down and go over everything so you have a comfort level. Just for that specific bid document, I'm almost done making my proposed edits, and I'm going to talk to, I believe it's Monday morning, we're all talking internally to go over that. So you will see something shortly, so you can give additional feedback. So this is going to be a little bit of a process, but we're going to make sure that everyone can understand. Just reach out to us if there's something that concerns you or you don't think we're capturing what it is you want. And at the end of the day, the board is going to have to choose how many of these options you put out there, because it's tough to put out a bid with 20 options. And the bid that went out last time had a lot of options. I have not seen one that was that extensive before.
Neither have I.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna keep it simple, like, that's not my intent, that's really what I prefer, but there are some things that like I said, choice is the biggest thing, and those protections for our residents.
Kara?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Kara?
Hi, Gary.
You can? Okay. After Peter's done, I'll go.
Okay. To your question, Kara, there's really, out of the whole packet, there's really only two things you need to focus on. And as what Greg stated, you need to look at the actual bid form. It's the form that they're submitting their bid on. And that's going to be laid out with all the various options on it, and they're going to provide their numbers for each of those options. That's and that's going to be the form that meets the question of who is going to be the lowest bidder. And then the second form, and I'm assuming, having not seen the big packet, but I'm assuming there is one. Usually we have what's called a bidder's questionnaire. And that is a form that the bidder fills out and kind of tells us about their qualifications and whether or not, do they do this sort of work elsewhere? Have they ever, backed out of a contract or messed up a contract or been held undertaking some unethical or improper actions or activities. And that's the form that's going to prove whether or not they're called a responsible bidder, meaning they're a responsible entity. Those are really the only two things in that whole packet that you need to be concerned with. Everything else is basically instructions to the bidders on how they have to bid, what state laws are being invoked here. There's a whole bunch of bonds and other sorts of sign-offs that they have to sign off on. But all that's really controlled by the state, so it's somewhat out of our hands. The two things we really control is the various options we want them to bid on and what questions we want to ask them to prove whether or not they're a responsible bidder.
Carrie, one thing that maybe will be helpful too is what we've been doing recently with our road bids is coming up with a kind of summary of the bid results, listing the contractor, the unit pricing for various options. And so instead of looking through 5 different documents and trying to figure out, who bid what against what, we've created a spreadsheet, again, for the road bids, with the different contractors and different results. I think we would do a similar thing with the trash bids, giving so many options. I think, to your point, having that in one place where you can see each bidder and each value of each, option under that contract would be very helpful.
I have 2 things I wanted to put out. The first one is I think what would be good, like if I went to my board and said, hey, read through this and tell me what you want, you get kicked out. My request would be, I don't know if you can create like an executive summary of what Peter, Tim, based on and Greg, based on your experience, like what do you think is the best practice we should be looking for? And based on what you've heard here, come back to me with like, hey, here's the menu that we think based on what we heard. Here's how we think you should approach it. So we have something to start with in terms of like, hey, here's the 3 or 4 main options, in an executive summary. The detailing out that you do supports that. And obviously the detailing out would need to support the executive summary that the board kind of looked at and said, yeah, this is how we want to go. To me, that seems like a better use of your specific knowledge and our read of the community. And it's kind of what Kara says. It's like a little bit of a rubric. But instead of us coming to you and saying we want this and that, I might give you some, certainly I can provide some feedback like that, but I think if it starts with, you folks as the experts hearing our intent, coming back with, okay, here's what we think is a good executive summary, let's talk about that. Then once we are solidified on the 3 or 4 choices that we want to have, then you detail that out into the executable document with the right T's and C's in it. So that's one thought. And then the other one is it really true? Like, I'm trying to understand this. Like, let's say that we had 2 bids and they were within $1 a year, and the one that was $1 more expensive, based on the answers to questions and everything, everything we knew about the companies from hearing reviews, we're like, we want to go with the one that's $1 more per year because, they have fewer complaints. You're saying we can't do that?
Nope.
Okay.
If they are $1 more, they're not the low bidder, and the only way you can get to them is if the low bidder, it clearly, based on the questionnaire, is not a responsible bidder.
So we can, based on the questions that we put out to them and the answers they give, we can make a determination on responsibility? Is that a fair way of thinking of it, Peter?
Yes.
Okay.
But let me, it is a very rare instance that a bidder is found to be not a responsible bidder. So it's not a close question. It's usually very clear.
So I've seen bids that no matter what you do, you go out and you lay it out, but the bids come back and they're always a little bit off. Do we basically go back through a recycle process and force them all to get the bids exactly identical in terms of units of measure and terms and
Well,
if one said they were going to have a 4x4 bin and another said their bins were 3.5 by 3.5, they're different.
Well, that's on us. We need to, when we put out our bid specs, if we are concerned about the size bin they're going to be using, we need to make sure that you must, use this size bid or bin. If we fail to do that, then that's on us for failing to nail them down. For example, this would be stupid, but if let's say we want everyone to use neon orange toters because they're easy to see and people don't run into them, but we fail to put that in our bid specs, and we get 5 bids from people using different color toters. Too bad. That we failed to put it in our bid specs. We have to accept the bids because they are responsive to what we put in our bid specs.
Can we reject if we don't like any, can we reject them all?
Yes, we can, but then we have to go back through the process again.
Sure, I get it, yep.
Maybe we should make the goal of our call on Monday morning to come up with that executive summary. Here are I just wonder if that would be helpful. Here are the 6 things we think we want to put in the bid. Would the supervisors agree that those are the important things to have in the document?
Yeah, I agree that having those parameters laid out is going to be helpful. The only thing I would have a little bit of a different flavor on is we can make recommendations from what we've seen, and we can also try to put parameters on it. But we also do need that feedback from the board because you are the ones who have the greatest pulse of the community. For instance, the per bag program. I have no idea if that's wildly popular or nobody uses it, and that kind of feedback is helpful. That's just one example. So I think that does help. It would be hard for us to make those kind of community recommendations, not having the level of involvement that the 5 of you do.
But to all the points that, Peter, Greg, Tim, you've all made, like you folks know the domain. And so my perspective is we'd want to leverage your collective knowledge of what works. And of course we can then tune it and say, that one isn't going to work here in Lower Providence because we're different. We don't like single bag collection or whatever. I prefer to get your smarts on that. That's just me.
All right, so I think I heard that Tim, you and Greg will meet on Monday, and you will develop an executive summary with what you believe are the most commonly requested variables, and then you'll send that out to the board for our individual review. Hopefully, we'll get some feedback from individual members so that when we next discuss this in a meeting, we've distilled through some of those to kind of focus in on what the more common ones are, without eliminating any, but rather just to have a response to that executive summary. Everyone on the board okay with that approach? Okay, any other comments or questions from the board? All right, hearing none, I'll ask for public comment, and Bill, I'll ask for Zoom comments first. Zoom comments first.
I definitely think it should be included as an option.
It is in the draft. We have no intention of not including yard waste. I can't imagine not including it.
All right,
He mentioned garden waste.
Hey, I'm unable to hear what the residents are saying. If they could speak closer to the mic, that would be helpful.
just
Or if somebody
for
could
Gary's
repeat the
sake, could you
question.
just review that quickly?
Gary, the person is an attendee, but entered this through chat. It was George Laws, and his question was, will garden waste still be recycled under all the proposed plans? He used the term garden waste. He is on as an attendee if he wants to comment.
Thank you.
I think we need to remind people to raise your hand at the bottom in Zoom if you want to speak.
And I don't want to get caught up in semantics, but
He's raised his hand, so I've allowed him to speak.
Yes, I'm just questioning about things like grass clippings, leaves, branches.
excuse me, Mr. Law.
Garden.
Mr. Law, excuse me, would you just please give us your name and your address for the record?
Sure. George Laws, LAWS, 3007 Concord Circle, Eagleville, PA.
Thank you. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, basically I'm wondering about grass clippings and leaves and tree branches, typical garden waste that might be generated, whether it's going to be recycled or just included as regular trash and disposed in the landfills.
That would be defined as currently as yard waste, would it not?
That's yard waste, yes.
So the answer to
yard
that
waste,
more
garden waste.
specific question is yes, that would be included.
Thank you.
Bill, any other from the Zoom call?
No one else has raised their hand.
All right, well, we'll just monitor that if you would, and we will ask for questions from the people in the room. Mr. Ferrero, please approach.
Joe Ferrero, 12 Pine Tree Drive. First question would be, can we extend the contract to the middle of summer, like end of the fiscal year, like June, so that this discussion doesn't come over the top of a lame duck session with the election and election football? That's question number one. Question number two, can we split out electronic waste? Because if everything goes into a single contract with electronic waste, I use a hauler down in southwest Philadelphia, Ecovana, that does free pickup 2 times a month from their facility. If we lock in and we remove the waste there may be a possibility that we negotiate with these guys down at Ecovana, and maybe we have events here maybe once a month where people can drop off electronic waste like computers, CRTs. These guys take any electronics for free. It's like first and third Wednesday of the month down to 58th and Woodland. It's not a fun ride down there, but it's worth it for all the waste that I generate with my computer business. Third thing, and one of the things I do is I run a forum on Facebook, and a discussion about trash was had over the last week or so. Brian Earnshaw made a very good comment about taxing. The fact is, it seems like your preference is to go to a single hauler. That means the community really doesn't have a choice of anything. So why not incorporate the cost and the management of this particular function into the township? You've taken over half of it, 2/3 of it, 3/4 of it. Why bother the residents with doing the paperwork, to sign a check every month, to do the transfers, to worry about it? Just put it in with a tax bill, and then at the end of the year, when we do our taxes, we get a write-off from it. At least we get a benefit somewhere along the way. We don't get the hassle, and it makes things go smoother. If you guys are hell-bent on having us have a single-user system, do it. Just don't go halfway. Don't make us like, all right, we're going to force you to write a check to the company with the elephant on the trucks. You know, it becomes a little bit goofy. You know, and it also, I was also going to comment on the fact that we spend a lot of money on this, maybe too much money on it, to the point of a company like Mascaro. They did a great job with Public Works with a park that they put in, but that's really the purview of you guys to do the parks, to do that over. We're paying this guy so much money that he's taking over public projects. It's a little bit much, and you know, we could maybe we can rein it in a little bit more since we're going the fiscal route. That's all I got. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for your comments.
So Joe, I'll just give a little bit of history, but I don't have all the history. So some time ago, that was how the payments were collected. The township collected them. Because you'll see in our yearly budget, there is a fund of bulk waste, I guess it was, because the township collected it and people didn't pay their bills. And so I see what you're saying, just increase the millage to pay for the tax collection.
Exactly.
But it is, so, but that other part about, I think Brian Earnshaw was, because I did read it, I think he was really saying have the township handle the billing and the collection.
Exactly.
That part, the township had a bad history with. I don't have, like I said, the whole history. I think there's might be about $20,000 outstanding right now of people that, over the years, that did not pay. And we currently have liens on their properties so that when they sell, they have to come to us and get that trash certification proving that they didn't know anything, or they do have to pay up at that point. So there are some.
But that amount of money is minuscule compared to the amount of money that's been collected and processed over the years. So that's a small headache, and you do have the facility to go after, basically go after that money. It's not like it's lost money to us. It's a little bit of a hassle, but you know, for that to be the reason not to do it, you're penalizing everybody for the bad behavior of a few.
Well, it was quite sizable when it first happened. That's, as years go on, it draws down because
Okay.
people are selling
Well,
their
we
house.
still get it, and the
Good.
lien also, I would assume, include interest penalties for not doing that too, so we're protected that way also.
No, good suggestion.
Okay,
Thanks
thank
for the
you.
info.
And I'll just tag on to that. Early on, I made a similar sort of observation, and actually talked with Chairman McFarland about it. And I became persuaded after doing the math and thinking about the collections and the scale of the operation that it's probably lower cost this way. Otherwise, I would have considered continued to pursue it. So that was just my analysis of it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Randy Klein, 835 North Trooper. I guess my question is, I think the township appreciates the board's approach to find a single bid vendor that provides the best service to the community. But in the event that that service that they're bidding for does not provide the best service to the resident, I guess the question to the board is, what is binding or precluding that resident from seeking its own service? So is there the option to go down the single bid route, but in the event that that resident, for whatever reason, whether it's the service isn't being provided to expectations or to the bid provided, what is the rationale for their being bound to have to use that service rather than choosing their own? What's the legal premise or rationale behind that?
I don't think it's a legal premise, but basically, your thought would be that it would be a multi-hauler, because anyone who wishes to leave the contracted hauler could do so at their volition and pay someone else to do it, which would mean anyone could do it, which would also then affect the bidding, since the hauler that was bidding would not know how many of those contracts he was going to get or keep. The bid would reflect the price on that for everybody else.
So there's 2 points. My, I guess, interest isn't in the township looking at a multi-supplier bid, focused on that single source supplier. But secondarily, I guess my question is, what is the legal rationale for binding the resident to have to use that? So have the township bid the single supplier service, and I guess provide for me a rationale why I, as a resident, have to use that, as opposed to, if that doesn't meet my needs, I choose the service I like.
Okay, Greg, do you want to answer that?
I'm gonna delve a little bit into the solicitor area. So Peter,
Do you want me to answer it?
you're probably gonna give the same answer that I am, but go ahead.
I mean, the simple answer is we have, if, in our bid documents, and I'm assuming this because I haven't seen them, but our bid documents have to basically say that everyone in the township is going to be using this. And if we're going to leave it open and allow people to get out of it, we have to put that as part of our bid. And obviously, if we do that, the haulers are going to increase their bid prices. So everyone ends up paying more.
So I guess what's the legal
that's the
rationale?
reason we want to guarantee everyone is using it is because that is how we get the best bid prices from the haulers bidding on our proposal.
And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe, to get your point, what is the township is ultimately responsible for the safe and legal disposal of solid waste and recycling. That is the legal authority, and it's vested in the township the ability to determine how best to do that. So I believe that's the answer to your question.
I don't really understand that answer. I'm sorry. If I could just follow up on that. They have a legal responsibility to maintain
State law
compliance
places
with
responsibility on the municipality to ensure that trash is collected within the municipality.
That doesn't
We're
answer the
charged
question.
with that duty.
I fully appreciate that.
Sorry,
If,
excuse me.
for instance,
Peter, let the resident finish his point, and then we'll try to answer it. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, sorry.
it's fully understandable that the township is responsible for ensuring that certain codes and regulations are followed and that trash is picked up and that the community is in an orderly standard and there's codes that protect that. That does not equate obligating the resident to have to pick this trash service. We can be compliant with those codes by selecting an alternate trash service, and if we're not, code enforcement's here to enforce those laws. So I know it's convenient to have all the residents be part of the bid, but I still don't hear a legal rationale, and compliance, so far as it's been described, maintaining compliance doesn't sound rational as why we're obligated or bound by the township to pick that service.
Can I clarify one thing before you answer? I just want to ask something, because this kind of goes to, it may be a rumor, it's something, or a belief that I've heard, that what I have heard is that if Randy decides he doesn't want to use the service that he has, he still has to pay for it. Is that true? Because I think that's the thing, because if he's bound to pay for it, then we are imposing that on him, right? And so I guess the legal question is, if someone is unsatisfied with their service, can they stop paying for that service and pay for a different service legally?
So the answer to the second question is, about the payment is no. They would have to pay for it because that's been something that if the board moves forward with a single hauler contract, that they would be obligated to do. As far as the question, would a resident be able to still pay for the service but then get an additional collection from somewhere else? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I don't know if, Peter, if you have any thoughts
I don't think he
on that?
wants to pay for it and go somewhere
Well,
else.
But hang on, I think the premise, again, is flawed. So in the event that there's a contract and the provider does not provide their service, the contract, I would assume, in the way that it's written, is void or not being fulfilled by the provider, and then therefore my obligation to pay for those services is not enforceable. I mean, a contract there has to be consideration for services provided. If the services are not provided and the resident's trash is not being picked up continually, week after week, month after month, called and called and called, I mean, I'll tell you, I have a huge bill with Mascaro right now that I refuse to pay because they're not providing me the service.
No, I understand your point of view, and the best way that I can describe it is, first of all, the contract is not, in a single hauler situation, the contract is not between you and the vendor. The contract is between the vendor and the township. So if there's an issue, it's up to the township and the vendor to work through whatever the terms and conditions are of the contract. But I think
Greg, I just kind of jump in because we are getting into a bunch of legalese. What's the recourse for the resident? I mean, the resident is getting these bills, the service is not being provided. What's the recourse for the resident?
The simple answer is there is no recourse in a single hauler contract for a resident.
That's not legal.
Well, sir, I didn't interrupt you. Let me finish my thought, please. It's the same as if you never plowed a street and the resident says, well, I'm not going to pay my taxes. They may be right, but legally, they still have the obligation to pay the taxes.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption.
The other recourse that I would think, and which, I mean, is the township aware of this issue?
I don't believe so.
Okay, well, I mean, that would be, in answer to that specific thing, I think that would be your recourse. Because the township has a contract with the supplier, and that supplier is not completing his contract. And so therefore, the township would try to enforce that and make that correct.
I think that's a fair suggestion, and we could probably look at that as an option. But I still have the question that has not been answered, which is, what is the legal premise behind binding the resident to using the services negotiated by the township with a service provider?
Well, sir, I think I did answer that, but, I just want to solve the problem. I just want to solve the problem. So if possible, could you, maybe after the meeting, or just write your name and address and give it to Mike or Bill over there, and we can get in contact and try to solve your problem?
That's fine. If you want to find and prepare a legal answer and you don't know it at the moment and you'd like to get back to me with that,
I want to have your trash picked up. If there's an issue, I want to get it picked up.
I would prefer to have my question answered, actually.
Okay.
Well, I hear you, and I'm not sure that sitting here, we're going to be able to do
That's
that. But I will commit to you that we will formulate an answer, and if you would, we have your name and address. We will, two things. We will look into the problem you're having currently, and we will get an answer with regard to the legality behind this type of...
Binding a resident to this contract.
And I do think it proves the point, right? He didn't know to call the township. We're saying the provider is supposed to provide that, but because we do have residents with issues, it's coming back to us and costing us money to manage. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying is what recourse, and that goes back to my question of real enforceable penalties. And I think one of the things that might solve that is if we did collect the money, we could then take the money off the top before it gets paid to the provider when they have penalties. Right now, we don't have that option. So I mean, there are things you can do, but I agree. I mean, that's my concern is you have no choice.
I personally think the greatest penalty option is the option of choice. So, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your input. Anyone else?
Good evening. Dan Hicks, 6 Stoneham Road. Excuse me. I've been a resident of this township for 16 years. That entire 16 years, our trash has been serviced poorly by a single hauler. Consistent missed pickups, trash and fuel from trucks strewn on our streets, and broken trash cans that we cannot get a replacement on after many calls and letters to both the company and the township. Supervisor Ekman stated at the October 7th meeting that it was unfortunate to have to do this now when so many haulers are having issues due to COVID, but I argue the service issues we've received predate COVID and have been consistently poor for as long as I've lived in the township. I've never heard a complaint from anyone with a private hauler because they can choose to take their business elsewhere. The township has already decided to not be in the trash business with municipal pickup. However, how is choosing a single hauler that may have consistent service issues get the township out of the trash business? At the August 19th board meeting, Township Manager Schuster stated, quote, "Residents do come to us quite often with many of their complaints," end quote. He also stated, quote, "Staff does spend a considerable amount of time dealing with complaints and issues," end quote. The township is currently in the trash business with single hauler, even though you say you don't want to be. Supervisor McFarland stated also at the August 19th board meeting, excuse me, my throat's a little, in reference to confusion around changing from a single to a private hauler, the concern that residents missing cycles would be catastrophic. Supervisor McFarland, we already consistently miss cycles, well before COVID. If COVID did anything for them, we actually, for a very short amount of time, got communication about missed pickups, but those stopped a while ago. Finally, it's been said in regards to private hauler, the township would, have to get in the business of policing if people get their trash picked up. However, right now, we need to police our actual hauler. Police have been called to my cul-de-sac street multiple times because of violence by the workers. The latest was just this year, where a physical fight broke out in my front yard with some of the most atrocious language I've ever heard being screamed in front of children playing outside, who went running back inside terrified. The police responded to this, and according to the police blotter, it wasn't physical in nature. However, the security camera footage I sent to the previous township manager showing that it was physical in nature, and all I ever got was a receipt response that it was received and zero action after that. The residents of this township have no recourse with a company we're forced to use, and that company has zero incentive to do better because we're guaranteed customers. Norristown Borough's newest contract required more policing of this hauler, and look how much that affected their cost to require supervisors on every route. That cost was passed on to their residents. If the board chooses to go with a single hauler, which it sounds like that's the direction you're going, because it benefits us with, quote, the best overall service, as stated in the August 19th presentation, that best overall service isn't just price, even though we're kind of forced to that. It's actual service, actual dispute resolution, actual sustainability, and non-violence in our streets by that hauler. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Any other? Anyone else on the Zoom?
No one else has raised their hand.
Hearing no further comments, the time to call for the vote. The motion to review is to authorize a bid for a single hauler in our next contract. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
And the motion carries 3-1. I would just respond to those of you that came up and spoke, that I am concerned and sympathetic with your issues, and regardless of who the next trash hauler is, we will try to make it possible for more responsive and penalties for the kinds of missed service that you're describing, to give us better leverage, and you better leverage with respect to getting the service that you expect. I understand your concerns, and I hope in our next contract bid, we can address those appropriately. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is announcements, and tonight we have our student representative, Samiksha Panda, with her first report. Samiksha, go ahead, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Shamisha Panda, and I'm really excited to start my term as a student representative for the Board of Supervisors. So to start my report, at the Methacton High School, fall sports season has been concluding, and many sports have been having their senior nights and games to celebrate their senior athletes. And next up is the winter sports starting in December, which includes sports like winter track and swimming. Next, Methacton recently announced the winners of the M Award for Academic Excellence for the 2020 to 2021 school year. And to get this award, students have to achieve at least a 93% or greater grade point average. And at the high school, over 400 students earned these awards this year. To keep going, the Methacton Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Team, or DEI for short, and the school district discussed the potential removal of the school mascot, the Warriors, and some Native American images due to controversial community opinions. However, as of current times, the district plans to maintain the district mascot name and images. Next up, the PSETs took place last week on Wednesday, October 13th, 2021. And while the sophomores and juniors took the test, the freshmen enjoyed a career day and the seniors a day off. To conclude, the high school will be closed on Tuesday, November 2nd because of Election Day. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Samiksha. That was a very comprehensive report, and thank you very much. Next, the notification or announcement. The Planning Commission's October 27th meeting has been canceled. The Zoning Hearing Board meeting scheduled for October 28th at 7 p.m. There is also a budget workshop wherein the board and the Township administration will be discussing next year's budget. Is scheduled for October 27th at 7 p.m. The next Board of Supervisors public meetings are scheduled in November for November 4th and for November 18th. This trash issue, along with our budget, will be certainly parts of those meetings. Whether we get to a vote on the 4th on any of them is undecided, but certainly as we publish the agendas, that will be public notification will be given. Any other comments or other business from the board?
I have just want to announce something from the Parks and Rec Board. There is a trunk or treat. So basically, anybody not familiar with that, the children are going to come and there will be people with cars and they will trick or treat at the cars at the park. And it's going to be this Saturday from 2 to 3:30. So we're looking forward to that. And then we're going into the holiday season. And so our annual caring and sharing program, we have two different pieces. There'll be a Thanksgiving piece where we're looking for food and gift cards for families in the community. And the deadline for that is November 19th. And then there will be a giving tree or a gift tree, and the deadline for that is December 17th. I did ask, because I am one of those people that forgets to go out and buy things or whatever. You can go to the Parks and Rec website and donate money. So if you're one of those people that's just too busy and wants to give, you can go there and give a donation of any kind. So just wanted to make sure that that was there. And then I do have a statement that I'd like to read, and I'm going to take that at this time. So I want to start, and this is, I want to start by saying that as a board, we have an opportunity to model and represent civility for the men, women, and children of all backgrounds in this township. I've talked to so many residents of all different backgrounds in this township, no matter what the party is. And regardless of their affiliation, what I find is that we are so much more alike than we are different. I am beyond disappointed in the fear-based disinformation being spread by campaigns at both levels. What is being shared is untrue and beyond the pale, and I'm going to address it. First off, I want to be very, very clear to every resident on this phone call. No one on this board, nor running for office, has ever advocated to defund the police. In fact, if you go back and look at the record, Gary and I have tried and failed to get this board to adequately address funding for emergency services across the board. We have significant problems coming in the fire department and emergency services. The police department is well funded. We've never asked to change that. And then we've tried to get help in working those solutions. So it's patently false. The fact is this board's raised taxes 4 times since 2014, and we still have $1 million deficit. There are structural issues that need to be addressed, and we've been trying to get them addressed. The second one is another one I'm seeing on social media, and I want to be clear about this one as well. So there's talk of Section 8 drug treatment, homelessness all over the internet, and that, you know, Democrats or some cabal are behind this. The attorney representing that project is my Republican opponent from 2017. The first time I heard about this project was about 3 weeks ago in a closed-door meeting where every single member of this board was in agreement in how we were going to proceed. It is far-fetched to believe that a candidate for office would be the mastermind behind such a project when sitting supervisors were not aware of it. Anyone who says differently is lying. Most people know what is intended when telling people that liberals from Norristown are going to ruin your way of life with their urban ideas, and it disgusts me. There is no place in this township for creating a culture of fear and division. I hope that the residents of Lower Providence see this type of political rhetoric for what it is. I ran for office because I don't believe that people need to settle for politics as usual. I've been very clear with my ethics policies and what I stand for. It's not something that I like to see. And I just want everybody to remember, when this is all over, you have to go out into this wonderful community, win or lose, and face all of the residents you've disappointed. And you may still have to work with me. Thank you.
Any other comments from the board?
I'll just have to say that I'm disappointed that, Kara, you had to bring all that political rhetoric here to the board. You're more than welcome to call Peter or I and discuss your concerns. We are open and available. As for the funding of the fire company, we actually, one of those tax increases that you mentioned was actually dedicated emergency service fund that 2 years ago that we all supported. It was unanimous. So some of the things that I believe that you're indicating as being false, you're actually stating false things. So I would be very careful with what you're saying, and also who you're implicating in some of the information that's out there in the public. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
We still have $1 million deficit and structural issues with emergency services that need to be addressed. And I asked clearly in the last budget meeting, we need a plan. So that is my statement. I'm not going to back off of it. I'm not lying. It's not political.
No, actually, the fire company does have a plan. It's actually
We don't have a plan.
Ever change. The fire company has a plan that's ever changing, and we made dedicated funding to assist them with their gap in their funding. So I understand it's great to be able to say, this is exactly what is needed to fund the fire company. That's not the case. It changes. Their situation is changing, and we'll be addressing that in this budget season. We also have a very large fund balance again this year and some money in reserves. So when you talk about there's a deficit, we adjust for that deficit, and we always balance the budget every year.
By
Sometimes-
taking from reserves and not addressing the budget. So we can talk semantics. I'm more concerned about the disinformation and using the terminology that's been used. But I appreciate the response.
And I also have a question for Supervisor Knights. Maybe he can enlighten us as to the missed $2 million revenue, I believe that he's mentioned on social media, and a free 422 ramp that I don't know where that's coming from in 2013. I've polled some of my fellow board members that were on the board at that time, and nobody has any idea of what you were referring to. Could you please enlighten me?
Yeah, after you enlighten me, I don't know why you're going here, but, you know, when I served in the Marine Corps, the uniformed services, we said, we're all Marines, there is no color. We all wear green and red, bleed red. You know, I'm disgusted by the race baiting that I saw, and I'm a Democrat. I used to be a Republican, but I'm a Democrat, and I seconded the Emergency Services Fund, and I voted for it. And I've advocated for the police, when I saw our SWAT team jumping out of helicopters with M16s, I think that's pretty cool stuff. I used to do it. So you first tell me, Colleen and Peter, where am I, as part of this cabal, defunding the police? Answer that, and then I will go answer your question, Colleen.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. No one has said that you
I'm referring to the campaign literature. I'm referring to your campaign literature paid by friends of Peter and Colleen.
Does it have your name on it, Gary?
No, it says the Democratic cabal. Does anything I've said have your name on it?
I don't recall any word cabal. If you could show me that, I'd be happy to explain it to you. Please.
Colleen, I'm not gonna play these games with you.
Okay,
I'm
so I
disgusted by the
asked you
race baiting.
I asked
I'm
you a question.
disgusted.
What 422
disgusted by the race
free
baiting.
ramp were you
Tell
talking
me,
about?
Colleen, tell me where the Democrats are defunding the police here in Lower Providence. Tell me. Tell me.
If you read the mailer clearly,
Tell me.
it says.
Tell me, where are we defunding the police?
Okay, well, maybe you should read the mailer again clearly, and you will get your answer. You're
No.
making inferences.
So are you.
So I think we've had enough of that conversation. We've gotten into politics now, and I just don't think it's appropriate at this meeting for this kind of discussion.
Hang on a second. We're leaders in the community, and race baiting by leaders, when we have racial division, we should be bringing people together, not race baiting. I mean, I'm actually disgusted by it. I haven't gotten political on this board at all, but, friends of Peter and Colleen calling out, using the dog whistles is absolutely wrong. There's no place for that in local politics. It's disgusting. And we support the police.
And frankly, you guys are better than that. I've worked with both of you. I've had very good relationships with Peter. I've worked with Colleen. That's why I felt compelled to say something. It disappoints me to my core. And I think it disappoints people in the community, and I just wanted to be clear.
So am I going to get my answer, Gary? What free 422 ramp were you referring to?
So let me go ahead and give a shout out to the police, like I did on Facebook, for the great work that they are doing. And Colleen, I will take it up with you offline if you want.
So you
But
won't,
I would say the
answer it
American-
because you don't have an answer. So in other words, you lied on Facebook saying $2 million in revenue, this board in 2013 gave up, and a free 422 ramp. What in the world, where in the world did you get that from?
So, Colleen, the American Revolutionary Center raised $173 million in their capital raise. That money was going to be invested in Lower Providence. You ran opposing that. That would have provided tax revenue to the township. It would have provided road improvements. The tax revenue that estimates I have seen are $2 million that would have brought.
So that was a
Now, what is the tax revenue you think that it would have brought?
It was a nonprofit going to purchase that piece of property. And if you had attended those meetings back in 2007, when the zoning was recommended to be changed and the commercial density that was proposed, you would have seen this room packed full of people, and outside this property was packed full of people who were against that. And I was one of them. And I'm happy to say that I defended the township along with the many residents that stood with me in opposition of that facility, not the facility itself, but the density that was being proposed here in Lower Providence by a nonprofit.
Colleen, it was a hotel. It would have brought in tax revenue. It would have brought in a lot of tourists. It would have filled hotels. It would have filled restaurants. It is a Foder's top 10 destination in 2018 when it was built. It receives rave reviews. We had a world-renowned architect that was going to put Lower Providence further on the map, and you opposed it.
I sure did, and I was happy to do it because the residents of Lower Providence didn't want it. Did you ever come to any of those meetings? No?
I went to one.
And it's actually a great location down at Independence Mall where they ended up. It's a perfect location for it.
It would have been even better out here in Valley Forge and in Lower Providence. It would have been great for the residents.
Can we move on now?
This-
I think you've both made your points on that, and this is not constructive in any way from the township standpoint. Kara's made her points. You've made your points. Let's move on from that. Are there any other comments to be made by the board before?
I would like to say, the sewer authority is going to be having a walk on November 6th. It's going to be around that's a Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, to take a look at the sewer facilities. So I'll be joining. We'll be looking at some of the stormwater damage there, and we'll also be looking at all of the facilities. But yeah, and hey, apologies if I got a little bit heated there. Just racism has no place in local politics, so I'll stand by that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move now to courtesy of the floor. We'll go to the Zoom. Bill, Zoom first on courtesy of the floor.
You have to raise their hands.
No one has raised their hand.
Okay, thank you. Just keep an eye on that, just in case someone comes in. Anyone? Yes,
I do have somebody who raised their hand.
somebody did. Someone raise their hand?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead with that.
This person is Hazel Bliss. I've asked her to unmute, or there. She should be available.
Hello?
My name is Hazel Bliss, and I'm here with my husband, Dan Bliss, who would like to make a statement. The address is 3593 Arcola Road at the bridge. We've been residents here for 31 years.
Hi, folks. We know the bridge, that was the area that was devastated by the flood. So I just have a small statement here. everyone who lives here near the Arcola Road Bridge has experienced flooding in the past, but nothing like what happened during the Ida storm. And nothing like what we have ever seen before. We've been here for those 30 years, since 1990. And looking back through the Graterford gauge report of height of flooding, nothing like that has been recorded for over 100 years. But during Ida, our storm experienced 115 inches of water above the first floor. That's about just under 10 feet. Others in our area saw flooding into their second floors, ruining treasured possessions that they thought by carrying them up to the second floor would be safe. So I just want the board to know that we need technical assistance and financial help. I know FEMA, through their flood insurance program, does provide some help, but it's usually directed in the wrong manner. And I will discuss with perhaps Mike Merzinski, who's a great guy, why the flood insurance program is in many ways, I find, counterproductive. Some of our neighbors' homes seem to be good candidates for a voluntary buyout, which would be, as I understand it, the FEMA flood mitigation grant money. I encourage you to support their buyout requests. Our situation there at 3593 Arcola Road requires mitigation, but it's different. Our house is made of stone. This house cannot be elevated as perhaps another house, a wood frame house might be. And certainly not at any reasonable cost. This house is old. People should know that this house was first identified in the 1769 tax rolls. I don't think it should be torn down. So it should not be a case for the FEMA grant that would do so. But for it to survive, something has to be done to the first floor. It needs to be hardened. So I'm one of those that needs technical assistance to make this happen. I ask that the township and the folks at FEMA and FEMA help me figure out how to do this. Thank you. Oh, wait, I got 4 more points that I'd like to make based on some of the presentations that I heard earlier. One is that I suggest that perhaps that someone build a list of people that live in the floodplain, knowing their cell phone number, be able to contact them, knowing when they expect a flood to occur. I noticed someone, a EMS, an emergency service person, was actually on the roof of our porch, which was rather dangerous, but they were trying to locate people on the second floor. We had all vacated by that time. But if they had had my telephone number, they could have called, we might have been able to answer it, and they would have been assured that no one was in the house. I have another suggestion for flood insurance, that the flood insurance be known at the time of a real estate closing transaction. Another suggestion, perhaps, is that there be approved standards for oil tank placement for properties in the floodplain. During Ida, or after Ida, I noticed that our oil tank, even though it is the entry points for it are quite high, still Ida waters allowed it to be flooded, and the area sank. Our neighbors said that there was a far greater oil stench coming down the Perkiomen Creek, in the days after Ida. My last suggestion is that perhaps that mortgage company appraisers include in their appraisal a little bit more factoring in a property's flood experience, so that properties are priced properly at the time of a buy or sell, so that new owners understand what the high cost is of living in a floodplain. Anyway, those are my 4 suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Blitz, and we will take those points and consider those.
It's Blitz, B-L-I-S-S.
I'm sorry. We will take your comments and include those in our further conversations that include the stormwater discussions we had earlier tonight. But thank you for your comments. Anyone else wish to speak?
There is another one on Zoom that would like to speak.
Okay.
It is Bob, and I'm allowing him to speak. Go ahead, Bob. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Hello?
Yes, Bob Zieske, 2708 Alicia Lane, Autobahn. A comment was brought up in the earlier discussion amongst the board members about potential change to some real estate, bringing in either a homeless development or homeless shelter or a halfway house kind of a place or something like that. I don't know anything about that, and it really struck an interest with me. When will we hear more from the board about that, either eliminating that as a possibility in the township or plans for it to move forward?
And if I can just jump in, this is his wife, Lisa, and I did read a lot of the discussion going back and forth on the internet in this past week. And I guess we're just looking to find out is this all rumor or is there some truth to it?
Thank you.
I can tell you that we have seen the same thing that you have seen on the internet and social media. There is no plan has been presented to the township for anything on the Harley-Davidson property. There is a great deal of noise about potential use of that property, but since the township has not been presented with any plans to do so, we really can't react to what we don't know yet. So at this point, it's noise, but there's no substance to it from the people who are intending to do something there. And I don't know that we have anything. We have not had anyone request to come in to see us on that topic, have we?
No, we have not received any formal application, although a concept was, put out to the township. There has been no formal application that's been put forward. Should there be one, there would of course be a public process depending on the type of application and what sort of relief or approvals are required. But as of right now, nothing has been submitted to the township to go through the legal process.
I'd like to clarify.
What's the method that the residents are provided this information? We live in a small 55 and over community, and my husband and I are fairly new to the township. How is this information disseminated to the residents of the township? Is it through these meetings or is it some other?
Hi, this is Kara. I'm going to answer because I want to clarify something as well. So it would be when if a formal plan is presented, it will likely go to the zoning hearing board first. They meet once a month on Thursdays because that area is not zoned for the proposal. We've not seen anything formal. However, it was a misstatement to say that it was not presented. We have something called a staff solicitor meeting where people interested in coming into the township will meet with 1 or 2 supervisors and staff, and we'll float ideas and get comments from them, and that did occur. I knew, and that I think was in the summer. I was not there. I was not the supervisor at the time. And then, like I said, I was made aware of it just a few weeks ago in a closed-door meeting that they were looking to proceed. It does appear to be homeless housing with monitored staff on the site. Again, very early. That's all I know. But there is some preliminary information, but in terms of plans, details, how many people, who's going to monitor it, all of that, there's a lot that would have to be done before it ever got to there. So you would have to just hang on to these meetings and keep coming and listening.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom?
No one else has raised their hand.
Okay. Please. Just give us your name and your street address for the record.
Rachel McKay. I'm at 325 Level Road in Arcola. Dan Bliss is actually one of my neighbors 2 doors down. I just wanted to encourage the FEMA buyout program. I went to the Upper Providence meeting and learned as much as I could and read as much as I could. My understanding, FEMA pays 75%. Now that there is emergency funds because of this disaster, the local township does not have to pay the 25%. The state pays the 25%. Residents are made whole as if it was a pre-storm situation, and a grant manager can be hired, and that comes out of the grant money. So there would be no cost to the township, and the township residents would get open space. My land is 19 acres. I have lots of fishermen. As the police can tell you, I also chase off hunters from time to time. They could actually do their duck hunting. People do their canoeing. You could put up a dog park. So I would encourage the board to expedite things as quickly as possible because it is competitive. Thank you.
Thank you. I can assure you that we are aware of it and we are pursuing it. I think what we don't know is what the limitations of funds are going to be and how those would then be apportioned to the people that are interested in undertaking the program. So we'd like, hopefully we can do enough to satisfy everyone, but we aren't sure of that yet. But thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
It's a long meeting. As long as Kathy Byer, Arcola Road. I just wanted to, a couple comments on, or I don't know if call it a comment, on Gary's presentation that he did on the flooding. And just question, did I see on there that did you think that we should increase the premiums for flood insurance? I'm sorry, I haven't talked in 2.5 hours. My throat's funny.
I didn't say anything about premiums.
I
for
saw
flood
something
insurance.
on your list, and it had the, that larger sign next to FEMA or flood insurance. Increase flood insurance premiums. It's on your bullet thing. And if it is, unless I misread it, because I was going to say, I don't think that's a good idea because we need to have more people able to get flood insurance. And that, I think, is one of the big, reasons why people don't get it because it's so darn expensive. And if there could be some sort of program to get, affordable flood insurance, that would be great. And then I was also thinking, we're talking about prevention. A common sense prevention is stop the building, the upstream. There's is anyone, I don't want to point out Upper Providence, but, they are upstream from us. And, is anybody, I know Colleen used to be or probably still are a strong advocate for open space. Is anyone fighting for open space anymore? I mean, is that I haven't been, I've been out of the, out of the circulation for a couple years now, and it's common sense. That's what's happening. There's no place for the water to go. It's not just that the storms are worse, it's just there's no place for the water to go. We paved Paradise and put up a parking lot.
So Kathy, I can't speak to what other municipalities are doing and what their focus is, but certainly in Lower Providence, we did just complete the updated open space plan and trails. And so, any piece of green space we can save, that certainly is a focus of that. So there's always financial issues, but we have that plan that we can start to now work through.
Good.
As money is available, and we can pursue grants now. That's sort of the manual, the step-by-step manual as a guide that can be used. I guess I don't want to say it's fortunate, because nothing's fortunate with flooding and the disaster that has happened to people's homes and properties. But if people so choose to do take in the buyout program, the township, all of us are very interested in being able to return those spaces back to nature and in an unbuilt environment, if possible.
Yeah, that's good. That's
So,
good to know.
every little bit hopefully will help.
Yeah, so that we in our township doesn't have any say of what's being built in another township? Like if it's affecting us, there's no way of doing that.
The only
It seems like there
time
should be.
you can do that is through mutual aid, and they're not mutual aid agreements, they have a different name, but there are, like Schuylkill Township and Phoenixville are in a consortium of townships where they kind of direct the building, and so they take a comprehensive look as a group of townships in those kinds of things, so they can direct density where they believe it makes sense, and they can preserve open space. And those are some of those things when I talk about planning that I'm talking about is how do we think big picture long-term to address these big issues. It's not something we are going to solve quickly. It is not something we can afford to solve right now because we don't have, as I've said before, we have not strategically planned to address how we're going to fund these things. And so we have pockets of money, but it's a big problem. And it's looking at, we're in the comprehensive planning stage now. It's looking at, I realized the other day by the creek, a lot of those properties are R3, which is denser homes, smaller lots. And we still have a considerable amount of open space that's R3 that I didn't even realize. And so that's an impact, right? It's right on the creek. So is that the best place for R3? And again, there's a lot of complications with changing zoning because people own those properties. But those are things that we have big things to think about. And it's something I'm anxious to do.
What does R3 mean?
R3 is like, so I always tell people, if you go over by Esky Park, all of those homes are R2. So R1 are the bigger lots. R2 is kind of that neighborhood by Esky. And then R3 is those neighborhoods by Yerkes Road. All of those are R3. So it's a bigger house on a smaller lot. So again, the water has to go somewhere. And you can capture it on lot, but do we need to change those practices too on how we capture water because the storms are bigger? And I think that was kind of the point of the presentation.
Right. I know there used to be, it was called Clean Water Action, and they one of their goals was to prevent sprawl, they call it, to slow down the sprawl. Because every time you look, they're upstream, is building, and we're really, getting hit hard downstream because of that. I know that's part of it. And another I wanted to address in Gary's presentation when he said, restricting building in floodplains. That can be a slippery slope, no pun intended, because infringing on people's rights. Because, if a person wants to, I mean, I understand that we have codes, like they have to abide by, how the heights and stuff like that. But to say that you would restrict somebody from building, if they wanted to take the risks, and that's their land, they own it, I think it might be an overreach to do that, just to not let people build where they want to build. And then they obviously have the consequences. And so that's kind of it, just was hoping, keep on that, Colleen, all of you about the open space and if there's, you have any pull and keep getting our insurance lower, till we can get flood insurance. And again, what Rachel brought up, that's another big thing. And would you guarantee if you had own the property that you're not going to build on it? Is there a guarantee of that?
I think that's a requirement of the FEMA agreement, right, Greg?
I haven't looked at those details, but I'd be shocked if why would they give us the money to demolish the thing?
I've been involved in a couple of those hazard mitigation buyouts over the years, and when the township takes the land or is given the land at the demolition stage, that is a covenant that runs with the land, so it must remain open space in perpetuity.
Good. That's
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
Hey, Kathy. Hey, Kathy. I'd like to address two things because you raised some really good points. I actually agree with you. If someone wants to build like on the beach and their house gets knocked out by a hurricane, like to me that's on them. The FEMA insurance increases are actually, that's something that has been going on for probably about 10 years. That's by the federal government. So they built in, I don't want to say 10 years, but going out from a period of time in the past out 20 years, they're gradually ratcheting up the FEMA insurance rates, because what you had was like really rich people building big homes on the beach. They would get wiped out by a hurricane, and then basically the taxpayers are subsidizing it. You and me are basically paying to rebuild someone's big house. So the tenfold increase, that actually was from the federal government part, where I said, what are the federal agencies doing? But I did not say that Lower Providence should do that. Instead, I actually think that Lower Providence should get that money so that we can buy the homes of the people that have been impacted.
Okay.
I hope that helps clarify.
It does a little bit.
All right, thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anyone else? Oh,
Thank you.
one more.
Joe Ferrero again, 12 Pine Tree Drive. I did not move in the last hour. At last week's Lower Providence Business Association meeting, I learned that there were no common forums for the 4 supervisors running for office. Given the interactions that I heard here tonight, I think it's imperative that there be a forum for the 4 people running for supervisor. To that end, last Thursday, I contacted our interim manager, and he really got on it. And he was able to contact the gentleman over here for the AV. He was able to contact the police to make sure everything goes lawful. And I was able to reserve the room at my own cost. My business is going to foot the bill for this, for you guys to have an open forum where you talk to one another about the issues civilly, because we're in a state of flux right now. It's 2 directions here, the status quo versus a challenge. And I really believe it's really important. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I am not a member of the Democratic or Republican Party, and I'm damn sick of a food fight. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and Monday night, if you guys agree, and I understand if any of the candidates are online watching this, I would like the 4 of you guys to step up and come to this thing Monday night. I think it is in the spirit of being a citizen of Lower Providence to do this. Would you kindly attend?
You haven't named enough conditions, number one, and as I told you at the outset,
Right.
number one, this is a business meeting of the township supervisors, not a political meeting.
I understand
So that question is probably more appropriate off this dais in a private setting. That's one. 2 is, there's conflicts on that evening that you mentioned that we would have to work through. I could probably do that, but would not wish to cancel things without knowing whether or not something else
I
was going to.
appreciate that.
And it's my understanding, you are talking to the other candidates
No, I
when you're
haven't.
standing here.
They have not responded either.
So I'm not going to respond in this microphone. We can have this conversation offline.
Colleen?
So when we talked about it informally, Joe, I said, you know, we're here twice a month. We answer questions, emails, phone calls, knocking on doors, meet and greets.
I
We've
understand.
been everywhere all over this township.
Okay.
So-
I think in compare and contrast with the 4 of you guys sitting in the same room together, because there's stuff going back and forth. Oh, your literature's bad, your literature's evil, da-da-da-da-da-da. Let's hear what people have to say. What was the real spirit of it? And talk together in a room so we can react together to it in a grown-up manner. That's where I'm going here.
Well, Joe, why don't you let us know if the other, what's their intent? So-
Has anyone put their hand up online? Are they attending, Bill? Okay, all right. I'm just trying to do right by the town, and this is nuts. Listening to what you guys went through during your comments to one another is nuts. So I'm putting it out there. I would be happy if, did anyone put their hand up on your end, Bill? Inside Twitter world or Zoom world? Okay,
We'll try to
thank you.
resolve this tomorrow with you, Joe. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Pretty much no one left that hasn't spoken already. We all set, Bill? All right, hearing that, I'll call for a motion to adjourn. I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is ended. See you at the next meeting on November 4th. Thank you.